I was this shy, very withdrawn person, and no amount of alcohol was going to make me something else. But I didn't know that then.
Bill Wilson, co-founder of Alcoholics Anonymous, wrote in 1952, "If we examine every disturbance we have, great or small, we will find at the root some unhealthy dependence and its consequent demand." Wilson suggested that if we could identify and continually surrender these unrealistic and unrealizable demands, that we may then be able to accomplish what he imagined to be the recovery's next frontier, something he called emotional sobriety. Flash forward 70 years and join psychotherapists and best-selling authors Tom Rutledge and Dr. Alan Berger, who have taken up the mantle of exploring Bill Wilson's new frontier. Welcome to Emotional Sobriety.
Welcome to Emotional Sobriety, the podcast. I'm Tom Rutledge, and with me is, of course, Dr. Alan Berger. Dr. Berger, how are you?
Well, lots of emotional sobriety yesterday, Tom. I did the second workshop out at Harmony Hollow Farm yesterday on dealing with our disturbances, man. And we had about 50 people show up. And, you know, sometime you're going to be coming out and doing one of them out there. I mean, it's a very special place, first of all. But the work that people did yesterday was so moving, man. It was very powerful. So I'm filled with the gratitude about seeing the impact that this whole issue of emotional sobriety has on people's lives. Dude. And look, we got a great show today. Patrick, how are you doing? How's your emotional sobriety today?
Well, you know, I'm excited and anxious about having a new guest on the program, but I'm just so grateful that we have our returning friend, Carol Carter, here to set the stage for us. She was a guest on the previous iteration of this podcast, Start Right Here. And now, we've seemed to come full circle, and she's joining us on Emotional Sobriety. How you doing, Carol?
Great. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. I'd like to introduce a new friend of mine, Brian Cuban, and Brian will be our guest today. Brian has been extremely generous in sharing his recovery story. He's an attorney and now an author. He's been in recovery several years. He's written a couple of books about his recovery journey, and his latest book is The Ambulance Chaser, and it's a great mystery novel. I'm halfway through, and I see threads of recovery in it and threads of local color as he writes about Pittsburgh. It's a very interesting book. So, Brian, welcome to the show.
First and foremost, I am a person in long-term recovery. My sobriety date is April 8th, 2007, and I am in recovery from two different eating disorders, traditional and exercise bulimia. And for those who don't know what exercise bulimia is, it's obsessive compulsive exercise for the primary purpose of offsetting calories. I am in recovery from problem drinking, alcoholism, alcohol use disorder, the clinical diagnosis. I am in recovery from cocaine addiction, substance use disorder. I deal with major depressive episodes separate from my addiction daily. It's a daily trying to keep it in balance. I don't have them daily. Mm-hmm. Also, 2 trips to a psychiatric hospital, jail, 3 failed marriages, all revolving around drugs and alcohol. And finally, my recovery journey began after my second trip to a psychiatric hospital, April 8, 2007. I am originally from Pittsburgh. I am the middle of 3 boys, born and raised in Pittsburgh, PA. I have an older brother, Mark, who people know, Shark Tank and the Mavs. I have a younger brother, Jeff. I am the middle, and I have my undergraduate degree in criminal justice from Penn State. I have my law degree from the University of Pittsburgh School of Law. And it's been quite a journey through the practice of law, through college, where I was an alcoholic in college. I was an alcoholic in law school. Trying to navigate those things and graduate was interesting. Not understanding that I had a problem, right? It's just what you did. Right. But I've been able to come out the other side and living my best life now and continuing to try to improve on that in recovery.
Well, welcome. You're our kind of guy, Brian. You're just ringing all kinds of bells for the rest of us here. So glad you're here.
It's good to be here. Good to be alive.
That's the truth. One day
I
at a
can
time.
hear that.
One moment at a time.
That.
Yeah. So we'll tell us a little bit about you talked about you've written nonfiction books.
Yeah, I've written 2 nonfiction books. They're both memoir style. The first was many years ago, was Shattered Image, and it was about primarily my struggle with eating disorders and body image. And It didn't go so much into my struggle with addiction. And the second was The Addicted Lawyer, which was released in 2017. And that was more covering my struggle with addiction and cocaine and alcohol and how it impacted my life as a student, a law student, and as a lawyer. And it basically, I lost my career as a lawyer. And so that it covered that in my journey into recovery. And so 2 different books. And then the third one, obviously, The Ambulance Chaser, is a novel. It is a thriller, a legal thriller. So very excited about that. And that's been out less than a week.
Wow,
and that also has a little theme that could be slightly autobiographical.
It does. It does. The protagonist, Jason, is obviously, you're right what you know. He's struggling with cocaine and alcohol addiction. I've never killed anyone, been accused of killing anyone. At least not yet.
I was going to say, yet is what we say in the program. You know,
it's been quite a journey, and really to understand it, you have to go back to Pittsburgh, the baby boomer era, back when we know cell phones were 2 cups attached to a string, and social networking was playing dodgeball on the basketball blacktop, right? And you have to understand the dynamics of my family. My older brother, Mark, the firstborn, he was outgoing and selling this door to door and that door to door. And you kind of knew what he was going to be. I remember our local newspaper went on strike, and he and his buddies, barely old enough to drive, drove out to Cleveland, about 200 miles from Pittsburgh, bought their newspapers, drove them back to Pittsburgh, and sold them on a street corner for twice what they paid for them downtown. So you kind of knew what he was going to be. My younger brother, Jeff, was a jock, good-looking kid, he's still alive, nationally ranked wrestler, the beer parties, the prom, the dates, all the things that I associated with love and acceptance. And I was classic middle child syndrome. I was shy, I was withdrawn, and I internalized anything negative said about me and wore it as kind of who I was, like a skin-tight suit. And unfortunately, I also had a very difficult relationship with my mother. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about this, but I want to make it clear that I do not blame my mother for the things I went through. I do not blame my parents in any way. There's no parent blaming here. There is a difference between cause and correlation.
Yes,
and
absolutely.
Correlation means it'll have things that happen in the home can have an mental health impact on some people, and it won't on others. There was a lot of fat shaming in my household. My mom used to come home from selling real estate, and she would see me. I would love to eat Chef Boyardee ravioli out of the can, and SpaghettiOs and beefaroni and one of those old style can openers. And we didn't have a microwave back then. You stick in the spoon and just eat it out of the can. Yes. And my mom would come home and see me doing that. And she said, Brian, if you keep eating that way, you're going to be a fat pig. And when I had bad grades, she would call me a dumb bunny. And these were the thing. This was the relationship she had with her mother, and the things her mother would say to her, and probably the things my great-grandmother said to my grandmother. Fat shaming in families is often handed down generationally. My mother had a very verbally and mentally abusive relationship with her bipolar mother. And so she was struggling with her own mental health issues at a time when a young mother struggling with mental health issues, you could be put in an asylum or lose your children. So you didn't talk about those things back in the 70s. It was verboten, right? It was just not things that we're talking about. And not understanding this, I grew depressed to hear these things. And I began to eat more Chef Boyardee and more Chef Boyardee, and I became a bigger Brian and a bigger Brian. And it so often happens when kids change for what other kids perceive in the negative at school, the bullying started, the fat shaming, the fat teasing, the fat taunting. You're a fat pig. Well, you must talk to my mom. You need to go to Sears and Roebuck and get a bra for your man boobs. Back when Sears was a thing. And I developed a very self-deprecating sense of humor to kind of put up a wall of the sad clown, right? The sad, deprecating clown. So the kids wouldn't know how bad that hurt me. And I would say, yeah, I'm headed to Sears right now and laugh it off. But it did hurt. And the bullying and the taunting culminated in what I call the day of the gold pants. It was my freshman year in high school, and my brother Mark had given me a pair of shiny gold bell-bottom disco pants. Now, have you seen Saturday Night Fever?
Mhm.
And most of us boomers have, right? And maybe even Gen Xers and the younger kids. And you have John Travolta in his disco pants, and John Travolta looked great in his disco pants. And Mark was very into the disco. It was just up and coming in 76 and 77. And he says he even taught it, although I can find no evidence of that anywhere. But he gave me this pair of disco pants, these satin gold disco pants. And I love my brother. We're very close, and I wore them to school, but they fit Mark okay. I had to jump up and down, spray the water bottle. My butt looked like 15 cats trying to get out, but I didn't care. And I wore them to school, and the kids taunted me and made fun of me. And I'm walking home with a group of these kids one day wearing my shiny gold bell-bottom disco pants. And these kids were kind of the bullies, but in my mind, they're also the popular kids, the prom king, the prom queen. This is before the internet, and my images of popularity were the kids I saw every day. The kids holding hands, walking down the hallway between the lockers, the kids kissing their dates, the kids talking about going to the concerts or going to the going to the ice cream shop and the after-school parties. And I was just too shy to ever ask to be included because I thought they'd never want to include a quote-unquote fat pig. I'm walking home from school with these kids, and I'm wearing the pants, and they start making fun of me. They start pulling at them, and they start tearing at them. And it became like a swarm of bees once a couple rips had got into the pants, like a pack of wolves. And they physically assaulted me. And they ripped these pants off me, tore them into shreds, and threw them out in a busy street a mile from home, down to my Fruit of the Loom tighty whities, my Pittsburgh Pirates t-shirt, my Keds tennis shoes, and remember the 3-color ring tube socks back in the day?
Mm-hmm.
Oh,
And,
yeah.
they went on like they had done the funniest thing ever, high-five them. I went out in the street, I gathered up the shreds, and I covered up my tighty whities, and I waddled home. People gawked, no one stopped. I got home, and the house was empty. It was funeral quiet. And I walked down the wooden stairs down to our basement, and these stairs were creaking, and with every creak, I felt like the whole world knew my shame, my parents, my brothers, the kids that did it, the kids at school. It just reverberated, these creaks reverberated throughout the world. And I got to the bottom, and I found a wastebasket, and I put the shreds in the bottom of the trash at the wastebasket, hoping that would hide my shame and I could forget about it. But that's not how trauma works.
No.
Trauma threads, trauma remembers, and unresolved trauma has a strong correlation to mental health issues later in life. And it was right around then, this was now, what was I at my freshman year in high school, 15 maybe, 14, 15, that I began to remember seeing myself in my reflection as just this ugly fat pig who would never be loved by anyone, not his mother, who loved me dearly, and was just dealing with our own mental health issues. We have a wonderful relationship today. He would never have a girlfriend, never get his first kiss. And that is how I started to see myself. And so I graduated high school. And as you might imagine, I was thrilled to get out of high school. And I went on to Penn State University, and I thought it was going to be a new Brian. Now I'm 18 years old. It's going to be great, going to meet new people. And my father drove me up to Penn State. And it was this crisp fall day. And I look out the window of my dorm. I'm sharing a dorm with 3 other guys. My father's helping me unpack. And I make eye contact out in the parking lot with this curly brown-haired girl. Because everyone's out there talking. Their trunks are open. They're pulling out their luggage. She's talking to this other girl. And I remember her, she was the most beautiful girl I'd ever seen, as 40-some years ago, right? And she looks at me. We make the eye contact, and I start sweating. And it's 40-some degrees, and I'm sweating. I imagine my entire life with this girl in 10 seconds. We're going to get married. We're going to date. We're going to get married, and we're going to have 2 1/2 children. My life is good now. It wasn't a smile. It was a smirk. She looked at me. She looked at her friend. She looked back at me, puts her hands over her mouth just like this. Ugly, ugly. Now, I am not the first kid to have nasty things said to him, right? It happened then, it happens now, although it happens now on the internet in a much more insidious way. And other people react based on their social, their genetic, their upbringing. And I was, unfortunately, another kid may have flipped her off. Another kid may have said ugly back, given her the salute. And but I was somebody who already felt ugly. And I remember thinking at that point, and it's not this girl's fault, obviously. If it's not this, it's that. And I remember thinking at that point that my whole world was out of control. I would always be ugly. How could I not be ugly? What did I have control over so I could not be ugly and win the love of this curly brown-haired girl so she wouldn't think I was ugly? I only had control over food. That's it. That's all a 17-year-old going on 18-year-old young man had control over. So I decided that getting thin and looking like the kids at school in high school was my road to popularity and not being ugly. So I began to restrict my food intake. And before I know it, I transitioned into binging and purging. And this was 1979, before anyone was talking about eating disorders, before the beautiful, wonderful singer Karen Carpenter passed away in 1983, bringing anorexia and eating disorders into the pre-digital national spotlight. This was before that. I didn't know what an eating disorder was. It was instinctive. I went out to this pancake house one day and I gorged myself. I came back and I felt so ashamed. And it was just this overwhelming, obsessive compulsive urge to binge and purge. So I go down to the public bathroom, I kneel over the toilet, I keep flushing the toilet, and I binged and purged. And I didn't know what it was called, but it was just instinct, literally. And every time I binged and purged from then on, I got this feeling of peace that came in for a few seconds. Like the next day, that girl would love me. The next day, everything was going to be okay. But after the peace left my gut, in swept this beach ball of shame, this inflated beach ball of shame. What am I doing? Guys don't stick their fingers down their throat. What is this? What am I doing with this? But I had to have that feeling of peace again and again. I had to have that feeling that the next day was going to be okay again and again. The life of a bulimic. And before I knew it, I transitioned into exercise bulimia, which is I was running 10 miles a day, then 20 miles a day. And I'm engaging in these behaviors, and I still saw this monster in the mirror, in the car reflection, in the classroom reflection, in the reflection at the local mall, in the windows. And I was just so ashamed and depressed. I instinctively transitioned to alcohol. I'll just drown it. I won't feel at all. If I have to feel this way, I won't feel at all. And before I knew it, at Penn State, moving from my sophomore into my junior year, I was drinking almost every night. I was drinking alone. I was going to the alleyways where the bars are at Penn State. And I would go to the state store, our liquor stores at Penn State, where I would buy one of those tiny bottles of tequila. I would take it with me into the alley, chug the bottle of tequila so I could get drunk in the alley, just to go up to the bar already intoxicated and hope that would create a new Brian so I could be this person that I saw the popular kids being, outgoing, right? The life of the party. And that's not who I was. I was this shy, very withdrawn person. And no amount of alcohol was going to make me something else. But I didn't know that then. And I kept drinking more to see if it could make me that. And that is how I began my journey drinking. It was in college. I was going to class drunk. I was going to class hungover. And I remember the only epiphany I really came close to about recovery or had a problem. I walked into a hamburger joint drunk, of course. And I don't know if they still do this, but they have the racks of pamphlets that the 12-step groups put out called the 20 questions. And it was geared towards college students. Do you black out? Do you miss class? Call us, right? Call us. Mm-hmm. Check out the meetings. We have, and I'm looking at them and I'm checking it off. Yes, I black out. Yes, I miss class. I crinkle it up and, my tryout for the Dallas Mavericks right into the wastebasket, even though the Mavericks didn't even exist then. And that was as close I ever came in college. And that was my journey with alcohol. That is how it began. And then I graduated. I was a criminal justice major. I wanted to be a police officer. That would have worked out well. I'd have been the first guy in the evidence room training up a baby laxative for the blow, believe me. And I was sitting in the placement office one day at Penn State, flipping through police officer jobs in these little pamphlets before computers. And there were two guys next to me. And they were from Pittsburgh, and they're talking about taking the law school admission test and going to law school. And the bells start going off in my head. Not that I wanted to be a lawyer. I didn't know any lawyers. I didn't care about being a lawyer. Not that I wanted to be Clarence Darrow or emulate Atticus Finch. The bells of law school's 3 years. I can stay in school 3 more years and I can binge and purge. I can drink. I can run, and I can engage in the exact same behaviors that were my survival, my Snoopy Linus survival blanket that I always had with me that got me through 4 years at Penn State, because that's all I was doing was surviving, right? We talk about recovery one step at a time. I was surviving 1 second at a time, drinking. That's all I knew. The tip of my nose is all I saw. I couldn't even see 3 years out.
Yeah.
And for those reasons, it made perfect sense to me to go to law school. That's it.
One of the things that stands out, just how strong, Brian, this I'm okay if mentality was inside of you. I'm okay if I got to a certain weight. I'm okay if I looked a certain way. And it's just such a powerful thing in our culture. It's this idea we objectify ourselves so much.
Oh, yeah. Especially today. I mean, an overblown need for acceptance and a drive for self-love can be as destructive as a line of cocaine. And
yep.
It sure can. It can. Yeah. Look, you start looking at the amount of money that people are spending on, quote, they call it cosmetic surgery. And now men and women, it's not just women.
Right here, you don't know how many hair transplants I have and liposuction and all kinds of things. I have done everything. I abused anabolic steroids and almost lost my leg. I have done a lot of things to my body to change an appearance that never changed, no matter what I saw, what I did. I got thin, I got very muscular, but I still saw this monster in the mirror.
Yeah.
It never changed since I was 17 years old or 16 years old.
Yeah.
The part about it,
how that image persists, right? I mean, how no matter what happens, it's so fixed, that image.
It was. And people say, is that a delusion? No, it was these disorders are on the eating disorder. I mean, the body dysmorphic issues I were having are on the obsessive compulsive spectrum. It was this overpowering feeling that built up in me that I wasn't who I saw in my reflection. Yes. And then boom, I drank. Then boom, I did this. And then after I did that, everything, but then it built up again and built up again and built up again. It was a vicious cycle that I did get through law school as an alcoholic, and I don't say that as a badge of honor. I barely graduated by the skin of my teeth, and it was rinse, wash, repeat. Going to class drunk, going to class hungover, drinking, going to the bars, drinking alone in my apartment, drinking the tequila before I even went to the bars. The cycle was the same. It was just a different setting. State College, PA, now Pittsburgh, PA, right? It was just a different setting. And I graduated near the bottom of my class. It was close. I still have a reoccurring dream about the going to graduation and the dean of the law school pulling back my diploma, saying you didn't graduate. And I wake up sweating, grabbing for it. The irony of that is I was so depressed about who I was and ashamed I didn't even bother going to graduation. And the flip side of that was last year in recovery, they invited me back to keynote their 2020 commencement. I wore the cap and gown for my first time.
Mm-hmm. And in fact, you have graduated. That dream was very powerful because you have, from what I can see, graduated into your life in a really healthy way today.
Yes, it was.
And nobody can take that diploma back from you.
You're right. There's the life I lived in addiction, and there's the life I'm living in recovery. And you learn. You hope you learn from one and build resilience. But everyone has a different path to that and a different timeline. But I picked up after law school, and with $50 to my name, took a Greyhound bus to Dallas, Texas, where my brother Mark met me at the bus station, and I moved in with him. Hadn't taken the Texas bar yet. And it was like throwing gasoline on a fire because they didn't know about my issues. Now my younger brother lives here. And I'm going out with them, and I'm going out, and they're young. They don't do drugs. They didn't do drugs, but they're young. They're going out to the bars. They're dating, and I fit right in. And my drinking increased, escalated, believe it or not. And then in the summer of 1987, I was at a club. I was at a very upscale bar, befitting my non-barred lawyer status, unemployed, wearing my high school suit, pretending I was something I wasn't. I finally discovered the one thing that for the first time in my life, the first time in my 26 years, allowed me to finally look in the mirror and love who I was, albeit artificially. The first time I discovered cocaine.
Oh.
I did that first line of cocaine in that bathroom of that club. And for the first time in my life, I looked at my reflection and loved Brian. For the first time in my life, girls love Brian. For the first time in my life, my mother loved Brian, and of course she did. For the first time in my life, Dallas loved Brian, right? And everyone that curly brown haired girl at Penn State loved Brian. Then the high went away. What happened? Brian hates Brian.
Brian loved Brian too. Brian loved Brian at that moment. Moment.
And
Brian loved.
Then the high went away, and the lockjaw. Like, what the hell? Where's that guy who gave me that free line? I found the guy. I bought a gram of cocaine, and I loved Brian again, and again, and again, and again. And cocaine and alcohol took over my life. I failed the Texas bar exam 2.5 times because of drugs and alcohol. I was arrested for DWI. And in the summer of 2000, I lost my career as a lawyer. And here's where privilege comes in. And I acknowledge my privilege. I have financial privilege. I have skin color privilege. I have many different layers of privilege that many people don't have. That doesn't mean I took advantage of it. And addiction on an individual basis clearly doesn't discriminate, right? It can hit anyone at any time, although it does impact different demographics differently. It was brutal. And in the summer of, I was trading in 2006. I was trading Mavericks championship tickets for cocaine that I'd get from my brothers. When we went to the championship, we went to the finals for the first time. And in 2005, I finally became so hopeless that I would ever look in the mirror and love myself. I lost all hope. And losing hope is a dangerous thing when you're dealing with all these other issues. I decided to end my life by suicide, and decided I would be doing my family a favor if I did so. And so I obtained a weapon, and I sent a very disturbing email to a friend. And at this point, I was literally, guys, I was literally Xanaxing, cocaining my way through every night and Xanaxing my way through every day. Days were just going by. I don't even know what happened. And when I was doing cocaine in the state courthouse and the federal courthouse, I was showing up to hearings under the influence. You're all wondering, how does this guy still have his license? Was he disbarred? No, but it wasn't for a lack of trying. And I say that tongue in cheek, but lawyers have a alcoholism rate at twice the general public. So it's a very real issue.
Wow.
Profession.
No, and you had tag team addiction. It's like one would just tag in and another one go out. You get you could sedate yourself. You could send yourself.
It was beautiful. If you want to know how it got, this is an epiphany. I mean, this is kind of a microcosm of what it got. One night, I had been cocaining all night, and I knew I didn't have to be anywhere the next day. And I was also taking this diet drug called Allie, okay? And I decided to take it because I was just a mess. And it can cause stomach problems. I took this Allie, I took my Xanax, and I defecated in my pants while I was zonked out on Xanax. There you go, right? The lawyer defecated in his pants. It about sums it up. And I was very lucky because this friend I sent a disturbing email to contacted my 2 brothers who came into my house. They took the weapon. It was on my nightstand, and they hauled me kicking and screaming my first of trip down to a psychiatric hospital. And I wasn't ready for recovery. They're trying to save my life. I want them to get out of my life and let me go back to the people who love me, at least until the cocaine ran out. But they weren't willing to do that. But I wouldn't go to the privilege. I wouldn't utilize the privilege I had. I refused to go to treatment. And so they took my car keys and said, just stay in your house for 2 weeks and everything will be okay. the Cuban rehab, right? That's not how it works either. But my family was no different than anyone else. And my only thought was my drug dealer delivers, no problem. And so I was right back out at it.
You actually touch your nose. You actually touch your nose when you say that, by the way. That's the old habits die hard.
I was right back out at it. And my brother was literally supporting me because he didn't want to see me living under a bridge because I had no career. And then I met a girl in January 2006. We started dating. She knew nothing about my issues. You know, I had a JD, but I had a PhD in camouflage. But it was getting harder. It was getting harder because I was nearing the end. I was really nearing the end. The cocaine's fun till it's not, right? And it was not anymore. I was really nearing the end. But I was always searching for that next line that would recapture what it was, chasing the dragon. And so we started dating. She moved in with me. Easter weekend 2007, she went out. She went to visit her parents. I went out. The next thing I know, it's 2 days later. She left on a Friday. It's Sunday, moving towards evening. She's looking down at me. I'm in bed. There's cocaine everywhere. There's Xanax. There's beer bottles and stuff strewn out through the bedroom. I'd had a 2-day blackout. I had no idea how I got home. She's looking down at me thinking, what the hell? Probably wondering if she walked in the right house. She's a lawyer too. I'm looking around, trying to get my bearing, trying to figure out what day it is and how to explain this Law and Order episode orgy of evidence that I might not be the person I represented myself to be. All I could think of was a metaphorical running home to mama. Take me back to the psychiatric hospital. What, you've been to a psychiatric hospital? Yeah, we'll talk about that later. I just need time to think about a good lie to explain it. So she drives me down there and we're standing in the parking lot. She's crying. And a few things occurred to me. We're waiting for intake. One, there wasn't going to be a third trip back. I'd be dead. Two, she was going to leave. And she actually stood by me, and we dated for a decade while I rebuilt a broken trust and found recovery. And we've now been married over 5 years and together going on 16. So
that's lovely.
Yeah. Not all relationships will survive it, and they don't, but ours was able to. But I had to do the work for me, right? Because people do leave, people die. Yep. And there's a lot of trauma in sobriety as well, especially when we have to actually feel our feelings. And then I thought about something else. I thought about something my father said to my brothers and I growing up. My father, who was a veteran of the Pacific, fought in Okinawa, CB, fought in Korea. He and his older brother, Marty, had a trim shop in Pittsburgh, PA from the end of the Korean War until his brother died in 99. And a trim shop is where they reupholster seats. They reupholster car seats and convertibles, and couches and put on convertible tops. Very working class guy. And he was the middle of three boys like me. He said, guys, wherever you go in life, no matter what you do, pick up the phone and call your brother. Make sure your brother's okay. Tell your brother you love him. This was the relationship he had with his two brothers. I wasn't ready to lose my family. And if you want to know how that stuck, that gift of family he gave us, which is another privilege because a lot of people don't have that. If you want to know how that gift stuck, all these decades later, 1,200 miles away, my two brothers and I live walking distance to each other. And my father, until he passed away over 3 years ago, lived across the street from me, literally across the street. And I was ready. Easter weekend 2007. Why not in 2005? I don't know. If we could figure that out, right, we'd all win the Nobel Prize for Addiction Recovery. But I was ready. And I chose 12-step. I didn't go to treatment. And April 8th, 2007, after a consultation with my therapist, who I still see, I walked into the rooms of 12-step. And when I sat down, that first day, I smelled and I was crying, listening to stories and comparing them, obviously. And I didn't know if I was an alcoholic or a clinical alcohol use disorder. But here's what I knew sitting in that chair the first day. And people say hard, comfortable chairs. My home group chairs are actually pretty cushy. They were nice chairs. And sitting in that chair, here's what I wanted. If sitting in that chair would, for the first time in my life, allow me to get up the next morning and walk birthday suit naked to the mirror, look at myself, and for the first time in my now 40 plus years, look in that mirror and love Brian without the aid of cocaine, alcohol, or anything else, I would sit in that chair, because that's all I wanted for anything was to love myself, just to love myself for who I am. And if sitting in that room would allow me to do that for the first time, I would sit in that room. And I sat. I did 100 meetings in 90 days, got my sponsor. And I credit, there are a lot of moving parts, but in large part, I credit my 12-step for saving my life, because those first 90 days in those first 90 days, you have to remember, we go through the rituals, right? Yeah, I threw away all the alcohol. I threw away all the glasses. You cut off. I got a new phone, changed my number, but I know my dealer's number in my head, right? I still know where the parties are. So being in that room during those first 90 and 100 days, when the pool was so strong and people were still reaching out to me, hey, I know where the good blow is and this and that. I don't know if I would have made it if not for that. I'd have been right back out, in the bar and, and dialing that dealer's number. And I went through a lot of therapy. I'm still in therapy today. And one day at a time, I am now rounding the bend. Hopefully, I think we say one day at a time, but I've been through a lot of trauma in real life and sobriety. I'm confident that I'll make it around the bend to 15 years. So that's where I am today.
Oh, man. What a journey. What a journey. I'm glad you're here, Jeff.
Yeah, and emotional sobriety is not always easy, because I'm still Brian, right? And there's still crap going on, and I still suffer from major depressive episodes, separate from my recovery. I've been suicidal in recovery, and I still see a therapist today. I've been seeing a therapist and taking antidepressants, but it's every day is a different type of journey to stay balanced, right? To keep my emotional sobriety balanced, because life happens.
Right. Let me ask you about writing. Have you always been a writer? I mean, I'm not talking about have you always been writing, but in your soul, have you always been a writer?
I think my soul always wanted to be a writer, but that soul was had a lot of alcohol and cocaine, kind of pushing that.
Yeah, I never got around to it for 30 years, but it's
when
like
I finally moved into recovery, and I was able to start the journey of figuring out who I am, right? Because the early recovery was just about, dealing with all the emotions and staying on the beam while I was dealing with all the trauma of my childhood and trying to heal this hurt little boy, which I still work on, and letting him know that none of it was his fault.
Right. And was the writing part of your recovery? Do you feel like that helped a lot?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I started out journaling in 12-step. I have my original journals from my first 30 days in 12-step. And but my first book, Shattered Image, was not meant for anything but to a cathartic recovery journey.
Right.
So writing, and never wanted to be a lawyer. The creative Brian was always in there, but just never had a chance to get out.
What have you noticed about, I'm curious, what have you noticed about the difference when you shift from nonfiction to fiction with this new book?
Fiction is a much different art. You have to remember, when I write memoir, I know my story back and forth. So it's a little bit, timelines are easier. It's a little bit easier to outline, but creating characters and creating interesting plots right out of the blue, it was a journey in itself, and a journey of emotion, right? And a journey where I needed emotional sobriety, because it was at times a frustrating journey as I learned the art of fiction.
Did you start writing The Ambulance Chaser during the pandemic?
No, I started it before the pandemic, but if we're going to find, and I don't mean to minimize the awful pandemic and the people we've lost, but if there's any bright lining at all, it's that it allowed me to finish my novel.
Yeah,
I get it. Yeah.
It allowed us to start a podcast.
Yeah,
that's right.
And so I don't think I would have it out on this. It would have gotten out when it did, if I didn't have the time, because I'm a keynote speaker. I speak at law firms, and I speak at recovery events and stuff. That collapsed, right? During the pandemic, you're not going out to events to speak. And I did some virtual stuff, but the speaking industry just literally imploded. So that left me with a lot of time.
I think we've all found some gifts during the pandemic.
I
found my voice in new ways that I hadn't expected. And able to look in the mirror and be very happy with who I see today.
Yeah, and it's allowed me to do a lot. It's allowed me to explore myself and in many different ways. It's from an isolation. I've always been someone who tended towards isolation. I've always been somebody who's a bit shy. My wife and I would go to dinner. We're not social butterflies. We're not out on the charity circuit. We go to dinner. We watch TV. We're looking for the next show. We have our cats.
Yeah, play with your cats.
From that standpoint, it wasn't anything that really. I know a lot of people it really impacted in the addiction rate in alcohol and the alcohol problem drinking rate. We know is skyrocket. I mean, from an opioid addiction standpoint, we had 100,000 fatal overdoses last year, and so that has been problematic, and that's from an isolation standpoint. But we've been able to manage that fairly well.
One thing we share in common, too, is we had really great last few years with our dads.
Yes.
And I have really felt connected to your story about your father.
Yeah. And
you've shared so beautifully about him on Facebook.
It's, I'll break up here. It's very difficult for me to talk about still, but it'll be raw probably the rest of my life because we were just so close. I'll tell you another story. My father never knew anything about my struggles. I didn't want to tell him. When this all happened, my now wife moved out. She moved out and got her own place. I'd move out, and she did. And I was alone, and I was so scared, and I felt so alone. And I went over to my father's place, and he lived across the street from me. And I knocked on his door, and he let me in. What's up? Come sit down. And we sat on the couch. And I finally told him what was going on. And I just started crying. Wow. And it was decades of crying. I was for the first time, that bullied little boy who wanted to tell his father about his pain, but was afraid of being rejected. And he wouldn't have. He would have loved me. And I was finally that boy telling my father my pain. And you know what my father said? He said, "Move in with me for as long as you need. We'll get through this together."
Wow. Look at
Come home, he said. Yeah.
Had a dog, so I would go. My apartment was right there, so I'd go and feed my dog and make sure my dog had company, but at night I'd go and stay with my father, so I wouldn't be alone at night.
They say so much, and it's so true, and how important the family involvement and support is for our recovery.
It is, and I think we should be cognizant that it is a huge privilege because, as you know, I mean, there are just so many broken families, estranged families, where that is part and parcel of the issue, right?
That's right.
And where somebody they don't want anything to do with the person's recovery. And families go through their own addiction process and healing process as well. And it can be very difficult. And so I feel very privileged to have a family who stood by me. And I wouldn't have blamed them, and it wouldn't have been their fault if they didn't. Because family, you have to take care of you as well.
No,
I love seeing that. Go ahead.
No, go ahead, Carol. Go ahead.
Well, I love seeing you stand by you today, too. Because I know what it feels like to not stand by myself, and I do today. And it's such a new, beautiful feeling. And it's lovely to see in you.
I'm always a work in progress, but you try to, do the next right thing and be a little better version of you every day. But, it's every day I get a little more comfortable with just being Brian, however anyone else wants to define that, right? Because what people think of me is none of my business.
Right.
That's the part of the emotional sobriety, isn't it? That we don't, we talked about before, you live such a strong, I'm okay if life. And then in recovery, if we do the work, it turns into I'm okay even if.
That's right. And I've had to work emotional sobriety with that on a number of different levels. For better or worse, I have a known last name and I get a lot of crap, right? I hear it all the time. You're only known because you're your brother. You're only this because you're your brother, right? So there was a long time when I was early in recovery when that would bother the hell out of me. And it would make me angry and it would eat at me when people would say that to me. Now, okay,
to differentiate or separate ourselves from, what other people think about us, about talking about the dynamics that were going on in your family and seeing that as a correlation, not as a causative factor.
Yes.
And that's so important, is you can recognize these things without blaming them.
Well, we all go through a process there too, right? I don't tell anyone what that process should mean to them, because people have been through awful, horrible things. And some people never get to that point. And it's not for me to tell them, you need to get to that point, right? I mean, we have people who have been sexually abused, sexually assaulted, and, there are just been horrible things in the family, beaten, and everyone's journey belongs to them. That's why in recovery, I am just so huge on meeting people where they are in terms of, my path doesn't have to be your path. My path had to be abstinence, had to be. I wasn't going to recreationally use cocaine a line a week, right?
You weren't going to be California sober. No California sober.
Now, if California sober works for somebody, that's great. But
that's good
for me,
right?
For me, if there's a baggie, it was gone.
Right. Well, my first sponsor used to say, blame's a good place to visit. You just don't want to live there. It's like sometimes you have to pass through that, but it is about explanation. See, that's what what you're describing beautifully is understanding yourself. We investigate, that's what therapy so often is. We investigate. It's what the 12 steps take us through. We investigate how we came to be who we are. We understand that, and understanding that is, as Alan and I often say, that of course mentality is where self-compassion begins, where we say, well, of course I'm this way. How the hell else would I be, having given my history? It's like, this is the way it is.
You have to learn to love yourself, and shame is, shame is a linchpin to recovery, right? And how you deal with shame. And,
that's right.
Shame is a normal body function. It's a normal bodily reaction to many different things, and so it's just how we deal with it that causes things to leak out.
That's it exactly, Brian. It's how we respond, right? The responsibility.
I mean, I still feel shame of things happen, and you feel ashamed. Oh, yeah. It happens. We're human. We're human. Yes. We're human.
Well, I tell you what, your book, I'm looking forward to getting it and reading it. And the last 2 years, one of the things the pandemic has been for me is I returned to reading fiction a lot more. And so I'm really enjoying reading novels, and I look forward to that. But looking at the reviews I'm seeing about your book, it's like, I mean, even without reading it, and with Carol's reading half of it, recommending it, I recommend anybody listening, go get your book and read it. The Ambulance Chaser.
Yeah,
right?
here it is. It's called The Ambulance Chaser. But but in any event, I enjoyed being on, and this was wonderful. And it's always wonderful to talk about my journey and how I stay on the beam, and always happy to do it again. You all have a wonderful week and a wonderful holiday season.
Thank you.
Thank you. You too, Brian.
Take care, everybody.
Tend your life, tend your myth. Cultivate your narrative with whomever you're with. Then with glass in hand and children on one knee, bring some stories, bring your stories back to me. It ain't a crime to be a human. Never be ashamed to be yourself. Rest assured that whatever you're doing will entertain me like nobody else. So here's to us, my old friends, until it's time to drink the wine and break the bread again. With glass in hand and children on one knee, bring some stories, bring your stories back to me.